We're going to pick up in Ecclesiastes, the 2nd chapter, and verse 12. And remember, this is Solomon writing this book, and he's been talking about the fact that he had more wealth, had more, and he keeps using the word wisdom, although we see that it's not necessarily godly wisdom that he has all the time. But he's been able to do whatever he wants, all that he wants, all the time, his entire life. And he's learned some things in the process. So in verse 12, 2:12, he says, "Then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly." Chapter 2, verse 12. And you'll remember over in chapter 1, verse 17, he said, "And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly." So he's not only wanted to explore the limits of pleasure and enjoyment, but he's also sought to kind of explore the limits of the human condition, the emotions and the mind. And in 12 he says, "I turn myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness." So let's remember that he said this. Wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. It's certainly, I think we would all agree, it's better to be wise than to be a fool. And yet it's interesting the perspective that Solomon takes on this. He says, "The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness." At least the wise man has perception and grasps things going on around him and has some perspective hopefully of his relationship with the Lord and who the Lord is, whereas the fool just blindly forges ahead. Then he says, "Yet I myself perceived that the same event happens to them all." Wise people die just like fools. And being wise doesn't mean that you're not going to have cancer. It doesn't save you from some of life's calamities. Those things happen to everyone. "So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity." Now, being wise isn't vanity, because he's already said that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. I think, though, what he is saying is that believing that you're not going to meet the same end, believing that you're not going to die, believing that you're not going to suffer, believing that everything's going to be great just because you've chosen wisdom or sought wisdom, that's folly, because he used his, quote, wisdom, right, to amass gold and silver and lands and orchards and wives and all sorts of things, and believing that would somehow give him an advantage over pain and suffering and death. That is folly. That is vanity. "For there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As the fool." And it's interesting that he singles out a remembrance of those who went before us. And I think about the people I know who have worked so hard to ensure that people remember their name. I know people that have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and universities are real popular places to do this, and hospitals are real popular places to do this, but they'll donate the school $500,000 if you'll name this building after me. And they sign a contract, and it says the letters have got to be at least this tall and engraved in the facade of the building, right? Because oh yeah, it's a lot higher. I'm thinking way back to my college days. And you know, as a student walking around A&M, you know, everybody knows Nagel Hall. I don't have a clue who Nagel was. And as much respect as I have for A&M, I don't think Nagel got in front of the judgment seat of God and heard God say, I wouldn't normally let you in here, but you've got quite a dorm at A&M University with your name on it, so hey, come on in. But for him to say, for Solomon, you know, the one who has everything that everybody thinks they want, to say, therefore I hated life, that would be like Elon Musk saying, I hate life, or Bill Gates saying, I have life, I hate life, I have everything I want, anytime I want it, all the time I want it, and I'm burned out. I'm burned out. I don't have to work for anything. Nothing is a challenge. Nothing has a purpose. And I have found in my life, and I think in the lives of many other people, that if we want to enjoy life, we need to have a purpose. And the purpose needs to be something other than gratifying our own ego and gratifying our own flesh and building up our own standard of living, our own quality of life. You know, when everybody's familiar with our right to the pursuit of happiness. The problem with the pursuit of happiness is it doesn't necessarily result in happiness, certainly doesn't result in joy, because, you know, let's say it was 72 degrees in this building this morning. We had a nice insulated building, and it was 72 degrees in here, and I was a particularly gifted motivational speaker, and we had pastors here and people tuned in by the tens of thousands to, and we had a band that, you know, people made videos of and put on YouTube, and millions of people watched them. Yes, we had I don't mean to be crass, but we had a cute girl in front, you know, that really drew in the viewers. Where would our purpose be if at the end of the day our hearts are not to better the lives of those around us? I was reminded several times this week as I read this verse of something that Jesus said over in the 6th chapter of Matthew. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And I think about that a lot, because then you really, if you're honest, you have to ask yourself, where is my heart? What do I place value in? What's important to me? What do I think about? Where does my money go? Where does my time go? Where does my effort go? And if it all goes into having the nicest home I can have and having the temperature right all the time and being as comfortable as I can, at some point, that's just not going to have meaning. That's just not going to have purpose. And we're going to end up just like. So to your point, you know, Benjamin Franklin tells this much repeated story about when he was a young man. He was in town and he heard a vendor playing a little wooden flute, and he just thought that was the neatest thing. He wanted a flute so bad. He wanted that flute, and the man wanted a nickel for it. And so Ben got odd jobs, and he worked, and he was so excited, and he was looking forward. And it took him like a month to raise a nickel. I mean, he was a kid. It took him a month to raise this nickel, and he went, and he was so excited, and he bought this flute, and he took it home, and he started playing it, and in short order, he had gotten tired of it, and he despised the flute and all the work he had done to get it. We had mentioned this, I think, last week. You know, we take no, it was at Christmas time. You know, we get sucked into these traditions of men, and we save up all this money. And we buy this toddler this expensive kitchen that does all this stuff, and the child, we take it out of there and set it all up for them, and they play in the cardboard box. They play with the cardboard box. They have more fun with the cardboard box than they do with the. And in short order, that kitchen is out on the curb, hoping that somebody else will come pick it up and take it home with them. I think Solomon went through those emotions. He put so much value in what he could do by being so wealthy, and ultimately, it brought him no joy, and he ended up hating his life because it had no purpose. And on that's such a good point. And what's interesting about this whole concept of free time is it's really very, very, very recent in society. Even I'm going to say my parents knew that, what does the world say? Idle hands are the devil's workshop. That as children, we needed to be occupied. We needed things to do. And games and television was not it. They kicked me out, and at a very, very tender age, I learned to love chasing snakes and lizards, and my mother would give me some thread and a pin, and I would bend it around into a fish hook, and I'd make myself a stick, and I rarely caught a fish, but boy, did I have a good time. Did I occupy a lot of time. And of course, there are things that you learn being outside that you don't learn being in the house. And in the generation before mine, my parents were born in the middle of the Depression, and they were put to work all the time, not only because the family needed that, but because it was understood that it was healthy for people to grow up with a work ethic and with self-discipline. And Solomon did not, because he had everything given to him. He was raised in the castle by the king. He was raised to be the wealthiest person. So I think that's a great point. I had that same vision of Solomon that he was spoiled, that he had never had to work. I have a brother-in-law and a sister. I have a sister and a brother-in-law who, now by my standards, I consider myself to be quite wealthy. I mean, all of us in this room we're in the top 1 or 2% economically of people on this planet, but they're an order of magnitude wealthier than I am. And my brother-in-law was telling me, that felt like he had raised his sons right. They'd been raised in a church school, and they had a good, strong work ethic, intelligent, all went to college. But he said, what I really, really, really worry about them is they've never mowed the grass. They've never changed the oil in a pickup truck. There are just basic fundamental things about how the world operates that they don't know because they've never had to do those things. And so I think, and we've talked about this a lot, I think that it's important that we raise children in such a way that they end up with a work ethic and they end up with self-discipline. I've had some conversations with men in jail that they really break my heart. On one hand, on the other hand, they're an excellent opportunity to talk about just exactly that, because they'll say, the man will be in his 40s, and he'll say, my son is in jail over in Fayette County, and I don't get it. I gave him everything he wanted. Okay, time out. I think I get it. And after World War II, we started seeing these books by Dr. Spock and the likes, don't spank your children, you'll ruin their self-esteem, Rahana went through a period in the public schools where they took prayer out of the classroom, They took paddling out of the school. They took time out. You can't sit a child in the corner by themselves. You can't put a child out in the hall by themselves. You can't legally even give every child in the room a goldfish cracker except the one who's acting up. And now we wonder why 1 in 34 adults in this country are incarcerated. I've had several articles pop up in my YouTube feed recently about the dangers of retirement. You know, because we live in a society that says, boy, if you were really, really successful, you'd be retired by the time you're 50, as if retirement is somehow a be-all, end-all. And yet, when I was in high school, most of the kids I went to high school with, their dads worked for Dow Chemical Company, and a lot of them were engineers. They went to school to be engineers. They got out of school, they went to work for Dow Chemical Company as engineers. They worked until they were 55 years old. They were good engineers. They invented chemicals. They got patents. They did what they were supposed to do. They retired at the age of 55 like they were supposed to, and within a year or two, they committed suicide. That happened several times to friends of mine. Their dads, they climb in the car, turn on the engine, leave the doors all shut, and commit suicide because their whole life was being an engineer, and they didn't have any other life. And when when engineer was gone, they hated life. They hated life. So one of the things I love about this book, and we're going to wrap it up, but one of the things I just love about this book is it is so blunt and it's so candid, and we can learn so much from Solomon's, let's just say, poor choices, for want of a better word, for him having gone through and done all the things that a person could do, and then share the fact that at the end of the day, he hated life because he had put his values in the wrong place and put his time and energy in the wrong place. And we're going to learn from that. I'm determined to learn from that.